We're going to be joined by Dr. Jerry Merrill, Director of the California Water Program at the National Heritage Institute, one of the authors of the 2014 bond. Why don't you come on up, folks? Lisa Oland, Principal of Oland Management Technical Services, also former General Manager of East Orange County Water District. The Honorable Devin Mathis, Assemblyman, sponsor of the Water Infrastructure Funding Act. And William Bordeaux, Chairman, California Water Alliance, Vice Chair, San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority, Board Member, American Pistachio. So, welcome everybody. Please welcome them. And apparently I'm moderating. Right on top of this. All right. So, good to see you all again. Jerry, it's been a while. It seems under this mega drought we've been experiencing since 2000, all the statewide issues are focusing primarily on habitat management, environmental issues, conservation, forcing urban areas to reduce reliance on the state water project. At the same time, more water is proposed for natural river environments for the increased difficult challenge of protecting and restoring fish. This is really an open question to everybody, but some of the focus has been on expanding lately about state water project supplies. With the exception of Prop 1 efforts and the Delta Conveyance Tunnel project, nothing's really been started on new water. I want to hear everybody on this, but we'll start with Lisa. Why not?
So is the question why or how are we going to get new water, or all of the above?
And do you think it's going to be possible with our electorate and where with the way we've been structuring these bonds is more focused lately on conservation, habitat, but not really talking about infrastructure and supply and new water?
So I'm going to put the environment on the side for a moment and talk about the money aspect, because I think most people relate to the financial aspect of their lives probably more than they really do the environment, although we all enjoy it. I was part of a steering committee for an initiative that was proposed last year. Devin was the proponent of that, the major proponent of that. He tried to get it through the assembly, and we called it the 2% solution. It was taking 2% of the general fund and dedicating it to creating 5 million acre feet of new water. Had to be new, couldn't be just paper water type things. Although in that 5 million acre feet, there was 1 million acre feet of conservation funded. So that would have given us about $4 billion a year, and half of that was going to be dedicated to debt payments for borrowing money for construction projects. So we felt like we had a really good solution there. We vetted it through about 300 people, numerous organizations, everybody from the construction trades to environmental groups, and put together an 8,000-word initiative that covered everything. Anything really would have been eligible for construction. It was an all of the above type thing. There was no preferences. We wrote that the State Water Commission would make those determinations. We really thought we had a winning proposition, and unfortunately, it takes about 1.6 million voter signatures to get that on the ballot, and that would have taken us between $6 and $13 million to fund that effort, because you have 6 months to get those signatures, and we could not come up with the funding, excuse me, for that. So in short, I think there is a funding shortfall, and until we address that part of the problem, until this state puts its money where its mouth is, where it says water is important, it's essential, it's a human right, until we do that, I don't think you're going to see major impact on major water supply projects.
Assembly member, let's hear your thoughts on this.
Lisa kind of hit it all. What we looked at when I was first approached about doing anything for water on the ballot, the first question was, hey, let's do another water bond. And I was like, no way in hell am I working on a water bond. Because what we've seen, and I spoke about this a little bit when I was here last year, and thank you all for the invite back. I'll try not to bore you. But bonds run out of money. When inflation is sky high, we can borrow this much, but by the time we build it, it's not enough. And so what I'd started looking at kind of on my own when I first ran ACA 3 years ago, it was, how do we create an ongoing funding solution for water? Because, and you have to be very agnostic about water in California. You know, there's those of us that would like more dams, there's those of us that know subsidence and canals, and we have to convey water, we have to do this. There are those of us that want to do desal. We have to do an all of the above. We also have to look at, you know, things like fixing lead pipes in schools, because schools aren't allowed access to water funding currently. So they have to go out and do their own bonds to try to get funding, and they have a problem. So we included those things in this. But doing another bond on the ballot is not going to work. So yes, I stole the idea from the teachers union with Prop 98. It works. Education's getting funding ongoing. Are there good years and bad years? Absolutely. But the reality of it is, conservation's great, but you only got so much water in the cup. And unless we invest as stakeholders, as people that care about water in California, unless we invest in a ballot proposition that gives us ongoing funding, you're not going to get more water in the cup of California. It's just not going to happen, because we've tried to do this. I introduced the initiative. I literally took the initiative, put it into legislative form as an ACA this year. It didn't even get a hearing. I asked the chairwoman of Water Parks and Wildlife over and over and over again for a hearing. Just give me a hearing. Just bring all the haters in and all the other people that like it, and let's sit down and have a conversation, air it out, because if you don't like it, then sit down and tell me what the hell your solution is. What are you going to do to get more water into the system? Because our population is going to grow whether we like it or not. We still need to provide food and fiber to that population. And, you know, I said it last year when we were dealing with all the port issues and stuff like that. We were talking about, you know, are we even going to have Thanksgiving this year? Christmas is canceled. I mean, this was the conversation last year. So relying on another country to import us food and fiber. You know, here in California, we pride ourselves on our environmental concerns. We have the cleanest, healthiest work conditions, environmental standards than anywhere on the planet, which is a good thing. But what are we doing as a state when we're not asking our business partners, whether it's water, whether it's agriculture, whether it's manufacturing, we should be asking this: how are you surviving in California in business under all of our standards? Not to mention the labor standards and the minimum wage, and I mean, I can go on, but what can we do to help you succeed and outperform people in other states so we can put them out of business and help you grow? These are things we need to do in California. But when it comes to the water, to building the infrastructure that we need, we have to, look, I'm going to be straight up. The only way it's going to happen in California is through a ballot proposition. The majority in Sacramento does not care about building it out. If they did, it would be in the budget this year. Is it in the budget? It's not. Our state budget surplus is more money than the entire state budget was 10 years ago. Think about that. It's insane. And not $1 is going to increase the amount of water in California's cup until we all decide Forget the politics. We need to come together. We need to take the initiative that we all worked on as a steering committee. Take that as a blueprint. Please do. And if you don't like me, cool. Work on it anyway. But that's the only way we're going to build for the future.
Now, Jerry Merrill's got one of the unique backgrounds working, actually written ballot initiatives from the outside, but also worked, deeply inside the Brown administration on crafting policy for the state. What's your perspective on how we move forward through initiative or through the state trying to solve some of these water issues going forward?
Well, just to build on what the Assemblyman said, we have this amazing budget surplus. And what does that mean? There are no bonds on the ballot this year. There was only one cycle ago. We haven't had actually a successful bond act. It'll be 6 years in 2024, which I think is a record. Well, the reason the legislature, I presume, is not putting bonds on the ballot is with a giant surplus, why go into debt? I mean, it's pretty simple. You wouldn't expect that. And so there haven't been any bonds and may not be any for a while. However, that does not remove the need for funding, obviously. The concept of using a piece of the state general fund for infrastructure has been around for a long time. There was an assemblyman from Contra Costa County, I forget his name, but he proposed this 10, 15 years ago. And intuitively, it makes sense. We underinvest in California tremendously on all kinds of infrastructure, water, transportation, and so on. However, as the Assemblyman said, there is a group that's been successful at doing that. That is the education people, teachers, with Prop 98, and they are very defensive of it. And so when someone comes along, as Lyft is doing right now, with a new carve-out, they want to do a millionaire's tax, I think it's Prop 30, if I remember right. The teachers are not happy because they feel like they should get their 40% of that money too. And so if the measure that all three of you worked on had gotten on the ballot, there would have been a very high danger that the teachers might have run a strong campaign against it because they would have felt that a certain piece of their money was going to a different purpose. Of course, there are ways to accommodate that. If you raise new money, you can give them their share, so to speak, and then they'll be perfectly happy. But it's tough to get around that, and I would never advise anyone proposing a ballot measure to take on the teachers. They have a phenomenal fundraising ability, and the public sympathy for education may not be as high as it used to be, but it's still very high. I would say that the projects, the water storage projects, the good old-fashioned let's build a reservoir projects, generally, some of them are moving along fairly well. Sites Reservoir, Los Vaqueros Reservoir, there's a pretty serious effort to build a new reservoir in the south of San Francisco Bay. Those projects certainly would welcome new funding, but I don't think their eventual fate is going to be determined by whether they get new funding or not. I feel like they're making good progress. So more funding for water infrastructure, I think is vital. I'm totally in favor of that. But I do think we should not plan necessarily on general fund money. We should expect that the water users, as they have for a century or more, will pay for that. And we should continue to pursue general fund when it's available.
I see, Assembly Member, you got a comment?
So for clarification purposes, within the initiative that we had worked on, we ensured that the teachers got their funding first because we saw that as an obstacle. So we built that in, as well as knowing that teachers also care about their students and them having clean water. We made sure to open up, like I said, for schools to be able to use this funding to fix their pipes and fix their systems. Because schools as it stands today their access to water funding is different, and they have to go through and they're expected to do it from their own budgets. So they don't have access to the state funds for those. They're expected to do it independently as a school district, which you're not going to see LA Unified pass a bond to fix their multi-million-dollar lead pipe problem. So we wanted to make sure, looking through that scope, knowing we don't want to pick a fight with the teachers union, how do we make sure they're taken care of first? How do we let them know that they're taken care of first? And obviously politics gets in the way. So I think it's worth, and that's a very, very good point. But again, and I've seen other legislators introduce bonds for different things, and those don't make it through the first committee because we have been with the surplus. So I do appreciate the points, but I do want to make sure the public knows, like, hey, we are looking at these things. As a steering committee, we did massive polling on this initiative, and William, correct me if I'm off on here, but it was, I think 72% was in favor. And typically when you do polling, you start here and you beat it up and it goes down. Well, we started here, we had the pollsters beat it up, and it went from mid-50s up to, I think it was 72% after we beat it up. It doesn't happen very often. So I think it's kind of safe to say if it was on the ballot this year, it would pass.
William, can you give us kind of the ag perspective on this? When I think of ag in Central Valley right now, I feel like you're fighting a two-front war between drought shrinking supply and implementation of SGMA turning off access to groundwater at the same time. How are you reacting to some of these pressures, and where do you go from here?
Well, I'd like to start off by mentioning that it breaks my heart that we have to go to Mexico to accomplish big things, or even move our agriculture there for a competitive advantage. There was a point in time where we could do big things here. We're blessed in the state of California. We have the Sierra Nevadas. It captures a tremendous amount of snowpack. And then we had pioneering individuals that came before us that built infrastructure that has allowed us to thrive for several generations. But we need to better manage the infrastructure that we currently have. I think that if we're spending all this money and resources on the environment, we should be getting a return on that. And so when it comes to agriculture, we're fighting on multiple fronts. You can't cut off the surface water and the groundwater and expect agriculture to thrive. And so with all of this uncertainty, it becomes very challenging. Now, do we need to invest in our in our future? Absolutely. But we also have to streamline it. We can't study it forever and do it. I'll have to have my children finish the projects. And so we need to get things done. And we need to be mindful of the environment, but we need action. We need results. And I think the resources are there. And I think, unfortunately, it's so bad that it may be good because it's bringing everybody together. We have alignment, and so hopefully everyone will stand shoulder to shoulder, from agriculture and water districts to municipalities to the environment, to help solve some of these challenges that we face.
There's been a lot of work in the Central Valley on the Sacramento San Joaquin blueprint and the Central Valley Collaborative Action Plan. What's the latest on those, and what do you think some of those implications are for those programs?
No, I think we need to inform and educate people of the vital importance of having a vibrant domestic food supply capability. And we're finding ourselves in a situation where a lot of the people with the experience and the fortitude to take on the challenges associated with ag are retiring, and their children are finding other things to do because it's just not as stressful and probably more lucrative to work in the Silicon Valley than to try to grow watermelons. And we need to make sure that those people that do that are appreciated. The people that work in ag feel valued. And I think we need to make sure that they're part of our future, because as a former Marine, if you cut off somebody's supply lines, they become vulnerable. And if we get our food from foreign countries, we become vulnerable. And it was very apparent during the pandemic when we rely on a lot of our medical supplies from China or any other country. They look inward when there's challenges, and we need to be able to take care of ourselves. And I know we're capable, but we just need to work together.
When I think about climate change and the drying up of certain areas, one of the aspects that you forget is that our weather is not necessarily going to get completely dry. It's going to get more volatile. There's going to be big, wet events. That calls for infrastructure to manage these big, wet events. an investment into that kind of large infrastructure. And yet we've been remarkably unsuccessful in getting environmental support for that kind of infrastructure. Jerry, do you think there's any possibility that we can get environmental support for rebuilding a different kind of infrastructure to deal with the climate change that's coming to California?
Well, I'd like to answer that, and I'd like to talk about money again, since we don't want to lose the thread there. So far as big wet events, we should be really worried about those, not just because we've had big floods in the past, but because a lot of those events are going to transition, especially in the Sierra and Cascades, from snow to rain. And as that happens, we're going to have larger flows in the winter, maybe not 1862 type flows tomorrow, but very large flows. If any of the major reservoirs in the Central Valley are unable to contain those flows, and there's a flood that again impacts Marysville or Sacramento or Stockton, one of those cities, the Corps of Engineers is going to come back and say, you know what, we need to require you to lower the pool in your reservoirs more than you are today to catch all that new rainwater coming in. That's going to affect water supply, hydro, recreation, every reservoir benefit, fisheries will be damaged by that. So we're going to have to invest not only to get new supplies, but I think I can see the point where we're going to have to invest just to keep up with what we have today. A reservoir like Sites, which I'm sure many of you know about, really has the potential to help in that regard, because it will be able to divert a large amount of flood flow into a very large reservoir and produce a fairly large amount of new water. I think those are the kinds of projects we can focus on, and the Contra Costa Water District showed in building Los Vaqueros 2, Los Vaqueros 3, as they enlarge it, that you can make an agreement with the environmental community. And there was environmental support and for that kind of project, and that can be done. I do want to talk about money just for a second, because all these initiatives, I've done 10, require funding. You can get money from ideological people, like, you know, who just care about an issue passionately. You can get money from billionaires, we've seen that, or you can get money from interest groups, which is most initiatives. In Prop 3, we were able to get funding from environmental groups, from traditional water sources, and especially from agriculture, especially in the San Joaquin Valley. It was amazing. But they saw the benefit of, you know, saving the Franklin Canal and other agricultural projects. If you want to do an initiative, my view is you need to go to the funders very early on and say, would this be of interest to you? We can try to accommodate you as long as it's in the public interest in general. But sometimes, and I think this may have been true the last effort, there was a passion to do more for water funding and a desire to do it in a broad way, but not enough perhaps of the spade work that often has to be done to round up the funding in advance. And so as this session ends, any of you who like to write checks with 2 commas in them, come see me at the end of the session and we can certainly talk.
I'm sure we can set up a table in the back and a fundraiser in there. Lisa, you've done some thought about crafting these kinds of initiatives and bonds. Do you think they are better when they just sort of focus on an issue, like, say, water supply, or do you think they're better when they focus more on project specific, that people, something more tangible that people can look at? Okay, if I give money, this is going to support the Sites Reservoir or something like along those lines.
You know, I'll just talk as a voter, because I think Jerry and Devin might have more knowledge about that than I do. But certainly, as a voter, I think multi-generational. And I think if you can tie that to, you know, historic plans. I actually am a big fan of the 1957 water plan. It's the year I was born. But it also, you know, there was a lot of good things in there. We are tending as a society right now to throw out, I think, the baby with the bathwater on a lot of our historic plans. And like Brenda, I think the law of the river, there's a lot of good law there. And the 1957 plan, as Steve Sheldon kind of brought to my attention, also has a lot of good planning that was done. And certainly if we had enacted or finished a lot of that, I don't know that we would be having this particular conversation today. But to your point and your question, I do like to know that my money is going for what the initiative says it's going for. And I think Prop 1 kind of burned the voters, and I think they know it now. And so I do think we have to do a bit of recapturing our legitimacy. And water agencies are held in high esteem in this by people. I think we're like number 1, 2 with police and fire. So it's disturbing that we didn't fall through on that. And with regards to sites, you know, there were 4 reservoir sites for off-stream storage. And I think that that is really where we've got to keep looking, is off-stream storage, not have to worry about this flood control aspect, get that water in there, and then we can decide about environmental needs, human needs, and things like that. But if we don't have that flexibility and those structures, you know, we're just all talking all the time.
Speaking of the 1957 State Water Plan, the Newsom administration just put out a water proposal. It did collect a lot of ideas that have been around, but laid forward a path going forward. I'd like any or all of you to weigh in on, you know, you've all had a chance to review it. What do you think of that as a path going forward, and do you think that that is getting us on the right track? Who first?
Devin, I think it's your turn.
It's, I have a hard time with just about anything Mr. Newsom does.
Okay, then we'll
Look, all things aside, I mean, politically, I am the Assembly Republican whip. It's kind of my political job to beat the guy up. But I think the issue is, and look, I'll say this, I love Jerry Brown. I worked with Governor Jerry Brown on cap and trade. We got into nuts and bolts of policy and late nights, and I mean, hard work, and actually understood the mechanics of what was going on. Governor Newsom's not that way. He sends his teams in, and they don't really negotiate. They just say, hey, we're going to do this. We just saw this with the Diablo plan. We see these things. This is why we don't see the big funding for water storage and capture and these things, and we see such a strain in the effort on the conservation side of his plans, on the environmental side of his plans. I will say there is one good thing, and it pains me to say he did one good thing in his budget, and this is some out-of-the-box thinking, so prepare to be shocked. Beavers for forest management. I said that, beavers, you know, the little furry. So I went on a trip with one of my Native American tribes up to the Tulalip Reservation during my summer recess. We spent a week up there. And they do this project where they capture beavers, nuisance beavers. So if you got like a housing project and you got a pond and the beavers over there messing with your pond, so you go in, and we actually did this. We captured these beavers, and then they relocate them to the upper watershed to naturally build dams. And they started this as a way to increase salmon habitat. So now you're doing an environmental good by increasing fish habitat, but on the water side, and they've got all the data on this stuff, it increases your water 60%. A 60% increase in watershed within 3 years, just by taking a beaver from here and moving it upstream. 60% increase. That has been built into, and a little tiny bit of funding for it has been moved this year to start kind of building out this program. There's federal dollars already available for these things. I'm planning on introducing legislation in the coming year. God willing, I win re-election, and we can talk about that after this. I'm Devin Mathis. I'm running for office. I need your money.
Same table in the back with
right.
Jerry. 2 buckets.
But these things need to be part of the forestry plan. They cut down wildfires. You know, we mentioned we're not taking care of the forest. We're not taking care of the environment. I mean, it's a huge issue, but beavers are a keystone species. So I could probably geek out on beavers all day because I've went and physically took the time to learn about them. The cost, it was about $4,000 to move a beaver. The improvements, you're talking about $500,000 in forest management improvements for moving that one beaver. But you have to make sure on the policy side that we're taking care of liability issues for homeowners, for farmers and ranchers, that the property rights are being taken care of, that stewardship rights are being taken care of, that these things are being looked at. I'm partnering with Jennifer Fearing, who's one of the big environmental lobbyists, and usually her and I beef on things, but we're beaver buddies on this case. So, but there are things that can be done, but you have to write this in the forest management plan, because if you get a new forest manager that doesn't like the idea, it's gone. But you have to do this on top of all the other little things that we need from capturing this massive range. I mean, last December, we had historic amounts of rain that fell on this state. But because the Army Corps, because the 100-year flood ratios, right, you can only have so much water in the dam and you got to let it go. Now, granted, my opinion, and William probably shares with me, send that water down to us in the San Joaquin Valley. We can put it in the ground. We can do groundwater recharge. It will help us meet our Sigma goals. Please send it to us. These are policy issues. So when you get into this debate of how much is a climate change versus man-made, the policy issues are man-made. Yeah, we have climate change, but unless we change our policies to make sure that we're capturing every single drop. With Diablo, I put out a couple op-eds talking about, and this isn't my idea, this is vetted. This was a study done by MIT and Stanford that came out last year about the ability to do nuclear desalination, and then when power peaks during the duck curve, you can build out green liquid hydrogen fuel, which takes diesel off the road. Because the only thing that can replace diesel engines is liquid hydrogen. And then we get into this debate on battery storage versus liquid hydrogen storage. And, you know, we can store electrons in lithium batteries, or we can store electrons in hydrogen. What do you want to get? 80-something% of the lithium comes from China. Or we can do liquid hydrogen here at home and take diesel off the road, and the admittance from that is water vapor. I mean, there's a lot of cutting edge things that we ought to be looking at, but instead we're falling into this mindset of, well, we have to conserve, we have to look at this, yeah, we need to do some capture stuff, yes, we need to do some conveyance stuff. The technology is there. I got beat up on social media a little bit. They're like, oh, you want to build 3 Mile Island in California. Let me ask you all this. When is the last time you popped your hood and checked the dipstick to check your engine oil? Or do you get a little sensor on your dash that's like, hey, knucklehead, take me to the shop? The technology has changed drastically. We need to kind of open our minds up to some of these things. Yeah, we may not have liked what had happened in the past, but what happened in the past was before you had smartphones, for crying out loud. So let's be smarter. Let's be more effective. Let's get out of the box. But I firmly believe we have to have ongoing funding to do this. And again, the only way we're going to get ongoing funding is if we all come together, put a proposition on the ballot that is going to force the legislative body, force the governor to ensure the funding goes there. That's the only way to do it and guarantee it.
I'd like to, can you hear me?
Yeah, please weigh in.
I'd like to weigh in. Well, I've been involved in 2 failed ballot initiatives. I think they were great initiatives, and it's just very expensive. The state is large, and it's hard to get the signatures. And it's unfortunate that we have to resort to that. because I firmly believe our elected officials should be able to come together and solve these problems. And I will work with anybody if they're willing to be, if they're honest about it and they really want to get these projects done. I'm encouraged by the governor's efforts, and I hope he's serious, and I hope he follows through.
Anyone else have thoughts on the Newsom proposal?
Well, you know, we have seen each governor comes up with a water plan. Really, the best one in some ways was Bolton 3 back in the 1950s, which really laid out every possibility, and it was very comprehensive. When I was in the Brown administration, the first time we did it, Bolton 160, and the second time we did it again. Governor Brown updated that and put it out, and Governor Newsom has really pretty much followed those outlines and put them forward. But I do think the test of those things always is, where's the money? Are you going to really invest in making those plans happen? The plans will be very popular. Everyone will like most of the elements of them. But when it comes to allocating the money, that's the only way the plan gets implemented. So I think I would applaud the governor for what he's doing, but I'd look more closely at the next budget round to see whether he puts money into implementing it. But I will say I'm thrilled to be on a panel with a fellow beaver believer. We are trying to bring beavers back to Marin County, the only county north of San Francisco without beavers, and this is a very important state effort, and the governor deserves a lot of credit for recognizing that.
So there's actually some really good literature out there about, you know, they knew introducing some beavers and were going to have certain kind of benefits, and the benefits were much greater than they expected, and in lots of different ways. And the same thing happened when they introduced wolves in Yellowstone, and that restored the rivers, which is not something they thought about when thinning the deer herd, restored rivers, allowed beavers to do so. A lot of interesting unintended consequences, and an interesting diversion on the panel, but encourage you to read on all this. But Lisa, any thoughts on the Newsom proposal?
I'm still trying to come to terms with the fact that the Bieber believers was Justin Bieber. And now I'm going to have to like change his thought, like, okay, beavers.
I'll send him a letter and ask him to be a spokesperson.
Yeah, really. I think you're onto something. And I can see these little beavers like going, hey, do you want to get a trip up to the mountains? Come down here, be a nuisance to this guy, and they'll. It's so cool. I hadn't heard all about that, so thank you. As far as Governor Newsom goes, I really don't think he had any choice. I really think he had to come out and say something and do something. I think it's a long-term solution, but I don't see a lot of hope short-term there, so that's pretty much what I think.
All right, we're going to put it open to the audience for questions, so please raise your hand. We have microphones circulating. But while we wait for, we already have a question right here, so let's, in here. So I was going to throw one out in the meantime, but let's go ahead and start with the audience.
I'm coming.
It's a race.
This is going to be a big question.
Here you go.
You got the mic.
My question is simple. Do the beavers need to get permits to do this?
This again, why I'm running legislation. So as we do the legislative process, we can determine whether they need a permit or not.
You know, it's great
I look
to be
forward
an
to your
animal.
input.
It's great to be an animal. Animals don't need permits, and they can just go right ahead and do their thing.
Thank you again. That's a great session. My name is Howard Hall. I'm with Ducks Unlimited for the Western region. I'm sure you've heard of the organization. We're the largest conservation organization in the world, 4 million members, and we spend millions of dollars a year in habitat and water restoration. So we're hearing in the previous session, in your session, habitat and part of the deal when you're working with environmentalists. So I want to reach out. How much are you working with NGOs, non-governmental organizations, like Ducks Unlimited, for doing the restoration for a lot of wetlands in certain areas that have been allowed to fallow, where we're coming in and adding wetlands to the state of California? And a little tag note that as of 1850, only 10% of the wetlands are still in the state of California. Of that remaining 10%, 90% are controlled by duck hunters and duck clubs. So it's kind of an interesting thing. We're perpetuating that. Thank you.
Well, as somebody that grew up learning how to drive on empty duck ponds and cleaning out blinds, I I appreciate the efforts. Locally, when I reach out, I try to bring all stakeholders into conversations. Not everybody shows up. I do appreciate the efforts that you all have in Sacramento. Your lobbyists actually do a very good job on beating on everybody's doors. And I say that because sometimes the Republican caucus gets ignored until the last minute, until people need us. And there are some groups that do a good job and talk to everybody, so I appreciate that. I know the caucus does as well. The wetlands are extremely important. I think there's a lot of collaboration even with agriculture that we've seen with the rice fields down to some of the stuff in the San Joaquin Valley as well, because, I mean, that's the whole Pacific Flyway. I've represented Inyo County and seen what has happened with Owens Valley. You know, in the back of my head, I sit there and I go, you know, if we keep fallowing all the fields and all the ag lands in the valley, we're going to have an Owens Valley situation, and we're going to have a massive lawsuit against the state over air quality. And I keep kind of nudging some attorneys that I know to actually look at that a little bit more, because we have valley fever. And as we fallow more fields, valley fever is going to be more prevalent. We saw a state of emergency for monkeypox, not a state of emergency for valley fever, even though it kills more people. And don't even get me started on West Nile and the lack of vector control and how spotted that is. But we do, you're right, we need to talk to the nonprofits, the NGOs, more often. I think there is a huge collaboration that could be done. So I appreciate you bringing it up, I'm sure.
I might add that Ducks Unlimited was a multi-$100,000 donor to Proposition 3. So they joined with environmentalists, agriculture, and traditional water people. And that's the kind of coalition you need to fund a statewide initiative. You need that kind of money, so thank you.
I firmly believe that we need to better manage our environmental water and hold them accountable to results, and they need to be measurable, because that's the only way we're going to free up water for communities and agriculture. And so I work with anyone that's genuinely interested in solving these problems.
Yeah, I think that, you know, look, we've worked with the environmental community for many, many years. That's not going to change. I would like to see some change in the environmental community, frankly. I would like to see them come to the table with this recognition that humans have a right to water, and it is equal to the environments. And that may be an unpopular statement, but until we can get there, I think that it's going to be tough to do some of the things I'd like to see. But I'm not queen, so.
While we're looking for questions, I appreciate Lisa's point here, because too often the immediate response from some of the environmental groups is an automatic no. And it's, especially when you're inviting them to sit at the table and to have a hearing and to discuss policy in the open.
There's a question in the back.
Wajid Malki from the Do Water Corporation. And this is amazing what you just said. I mean, there's no better way to put it. Humans have the right to water. And it's time for us to look at the other water resources that Mother Nature had made available to us, whether it's, you know, seawater desalination, wastewater reuse, or even water from air. My question is, isn't it time for the water utilities to start doing what their name suggests, which is providing utility water to the homes, and decentralize the drinking water, maybe by tapping into the water from air?
So, being a policymaker in Sacramento, I've spoken with many groups. The problem that we have the technology to capture water out of the air. I've seen it, I've done it, it's successful if you have the right climate for it. And you have to be able to build these things out to scale. The sad part is on the air capture, a lot of the places you get into the cost, you get into, what's the ROI going to be to do this? And unfortunately, the areas in the state where we need to do it, the climate's just not right for it. And I'm talking about the actual natural seasonal climate for it. And I'm sure you might be able to dive a little bit more into that. But as far as the other stuff, again, I mean, that MIT Stanford study talking about Diablo Canyon, it's 113 pages. I've read it. Take a look at it. Diablo Canyon has 2 reactors. The place was built and designed for 6. The San Luis Reservoir, something like 91 miles away. You could power that with the reactor. It's naturally doing desal because you heat up the boiler and you capture the steam. I mean, this isn't new technology. You could move that. I mean, we pump water over the grapevine down here. You're telling me with nuclear power we can't pump water 91 miles to the San Luis water and plug it into the California system? I mean, I'm not an engineer, but if we can do it over the grapevine, why can't we do it here? But we have to change our thinking when it comes to these things. And when I say nuclear, I mean the modern nuclear systems that are being used in the United Kingdom, France, Germany's looking at doing this. If you pay any attention to what's happening in Europe and how they're trying to get away from Russian energy into their own, they're looking at what's called pelletized nuclear systems. It's a pellet about the size of the tip of your thumb that's a silicon base that's recyclable. So once the concept is completely proven, that moves nuclear from being outside of the renewable portfolio into the renewable portfolio. Big things.
Jeff,
Yeah, Jerry.
the idea of new technologies is important, and I agree with it. UC Davis and Metropolitan Water District and Yuba County Water Agency and Ag Extension just recently completed a study in Yolo County to show that a plant called yellow star thistle, which isn't so bad here but is really bad in the Sacramento Valley, actually depletes the groundwater to such a remarkable extent that if you can get rid of it, you can improve groundwater recharge to the extent of about 1/4 of an acre-foot per acre. There are 8 million acres of yellow star thistle in California. So MWD is now looking at extending that study to perhaps go to a larger watershed, because the farmers would love to get rid of yellow star thistle, the ranchers, and if we can improve our water supply at a very low cost, it might be a reasonable source of new water.
And beavers like star thistle, I think.
No.
Okay. A quick comment before the next
No,
question.
very quick comment. I think American ingenuity and innovation will play a key role in our future as long as we can find a way to get the government out of our way.
Hi, good morning. Ty Fan. I'm a Santa Ana council member. I'm a Met board director. I'm also an attorney at Rattan and Tucker. And I just want to thank you all for being here. It's my first OC Water Summit, so I'm excited to learn. I do have a question when we're talking about, ag, human consumption, and environment, right? You're talking about the beavers. Vox actually has a great 10-minute video on how beavers are very important, so go check it out. But I guess my curiosity has to do with ag, and maybe I'm a jealous lover. I'm from Orange County, where, lots of residents. I represent Santa Ana, and we have very low water usage per capita because they're mostly multifamily. We're a very low income community. And so asking my residents to cut back more and more and more is actually really difficult. But I'm curious, and maybe it's a question for Bill or all of you up here, 44% of California agriculture is actually exported to foreign countries. So what I'm seeing is this, difficult to renew resource, which is liquid gold, our water, 44% of it that we're using, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that's just what my understanding is going to a country that is not, helping our own residents. Whereas, for example, I think it's $50 billion in the agricultural industry that's generated, but it's $510 billion from the tech industry. So, I would love to hear how we can address some of those issues when I want to have, local food resources. I think local sustainability is the most important thing for us. But if we're exporting 44% of the things we grow, meaning we export a large percentage of the water that we use to grow these resources, I don't know how that's sustainable or beneficial for this state or this country. So I'd love to hear, how do we address that in the long term?
Well,
you want to go first?
Sure, I'd love to. I think if you look at the big picture, we need to be exporting more things. You know, we don't do enough. We're consuming and we're not producing. And so I think we need to do a better job of that, because there's a massive trade imbalance. And if we're going to pay back all these debts that we're accumulating, we're going to have to find ways to sell things. And I think selling shelf-stable, very highly nutritious food to our friends and allies is in our best interest. Now, the people in your communities are consuming some of the water that we're producing, because when we grow the food and you consume it, you're part of that whole symbiotic relationship. And so I'm not for being wasteful, but I'm also for being mindful. And if we aren't successful in an agricultural industry, and we are limited in who we can sell our goods to, we will fail. And so I do think we need to do a better job as a country producing and exporting. And we need to find a way to better utilize our resources. And I do think we are blessed with resources here in the state of California. We have a wonderful Mediterranean climate, we have deep soils, and we have the Sierra Nevadas that capture a lot of snowpack. We just have to better manage the water supply.
With that, a question I got asked the other day was, how do we get farmers to conserve more? And my answer was kind of, that's the wrong question. Farmers use only the drops of water that they need to produce at maximum efficiency. So there's this concept out there that these farmers are just wasting water. Well, that water costs them money. That's part of their business programming on every single drop that they use. So part of our thinking concept is we need to get this idea out of our heads that ag is wasting water. Because William's absolutely right, that the water is being produced and doing all these great things. The other thing that we need to think about too, somebody that represents the San Joaquin Valley, 1 in 4 jobs in the valley is related to ag. 1 in 4. So now you have 1 in 4. Most of those people are married. That's your teachers, that's the people working at the stores, the post office, your law enforcement. So now it's 2 in 4, so now it's half. So when we lose those water resources, those crops are fallowed, half of that population is gone. And now we have a ghost town. We have a dust bowl. That's something that needs to be thought about quite a bit more. Because when you're talking about that, my area, we have over 40,000 jobs that are direct ag jobs, 40,000 that are direct. Then you add in the 1 in 4. And then you add in the spouses. Then you add in the 2.5 kids into the situation. Then you go from 40,000 to 80,000 to 120 to a couple million really quick. I represent 500,000 people. Granted, it's more than the governor of Missouri, but we're not a Midwestern state. We're the 5th largest economy in the world. So when you start breaking it down to mom, dad, the kids gone, being millions of people gone, where do they go? Where are these families supposed to move to? And then where are the rest of the families? Because once they're gone, that food production is gone. It's dried up. So then what do we do? And that's something that we all need to think about a lot deeper.